have to go now.
Sorry?
We have to go now.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm very sorry that
Merci,
my
Monsieur le Président.
plan
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right, President Braconnier has said it all. A hearty welcome to the LLM Public Law and Democracy and to this inaugural lecture. We're extremely privileged. I'm very pleased indeed to have with us probably one of the most conspicuous and outstanding public lawyers in Europe, also Timothy Endicott. As Stéphane Braconnier has said, Timothy is Vinerian Professor of the Laws of England. Then again, he has some very famous predecessors. I mentioned Blackstone, who knew not what public law was, and Dicey, who had an idea of what constitutional law was. Really, Timothy is special in the fact that he is really a very, very prominent thinker and writer in two fields. Just one is already an accomplishment, but Timothy is really, at the same time, a very important public lawyer and someone on legal theories. I don't know if you like the word, or if you prefer legal philosopher or just nothing at all, lawyer.
Yeah, all of the above.
Okay, yeah, but then again, just to give you an idea, when I teach English administrative law at a very basic level in France, I teach based on his administrative law book, which I think, and that's only my point of view, is the best. It's very, very, very clear in a topic which is not clear about now. So Timothy, maybe because he's Canadian, he's adding clarity to English law. Maybe that's the reason why, I don't know. But then again, it's a magnificent book, very pedagogical, very didactic at the same time as very clever. But Timothy has also written on jurisprudence. Probably his most famous work is vagueness in the law, vagueness and the law.
Vagueness
in the law. But he's a man of many parts. He's a man of many talents. I remember meeting him at a legal history conference, Endicott versus Carrington. So he's able to do many things. Today, he will show us that he also had great insights on really our topic in the LLM, which is democracy. Having Timothy is great for us because this LLM is about bridging the gap between theory and I wouldn't say practice, but the legal and practical dimensions of democracy. So really, Timothy is the best person to give the inaugural lecture. We're extremely privileged to have him. And we're going to proceed this way. He's going to speak as long as he wants to. Probably 1 hour would be a nice. I don't want to put any pressure on you. Time is not of the essence, but probably be up to 1 hour, and then we will have ample time for questions on remarks from the floor. I'll be moderating the questions, but that will be all my contribution to today's conversation. Timothy, thank you so much for being here. We're privileged to have your spouse as well, which I'm happy to acknowledge. I'm also happy to acknowledge Amnon Lev, who has been very important in building up this LLM program, and my colleague Cécile Bach, many other students who will now listen to you with great attention and pleasure. Thank you, Timothy.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for that, and thank you all for coming. Denis has given me great freedom, but I'm going to try to impose a limit on myself of 1 hour. This is an exploration for me. When Denis invited me to give this lecture, I was very pleased, and when I saw the name of the LLM, I know that you're not all LLM students, but I thought I would design a lecture for an LLM in public law and democracy, and start thinking about democracy. I've taught administrative law in the United Kingdom since the previous millennium without ever thinking or writing in any organized fashion about democracy, and in England you can do that. But I thought, well, democracy puzzles me, and I'd like to think about it. So here I am, and I'm still learning, and I'm puzzled about it, and I hope to learn from you. And I'm going to focus on one thing that puzzles me, which is a way in which the idea of democracy is used in political and legal thinking in the United Kingdom today. And it's all thanks to Boris Johnson. I will in the course of my lecture mention the downfall of Boris Johnson, which is I'm a bit of a booster for the British Constitution, by the way. It's not perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect constitution. It has some notable failings, which I will actually mention. But wasn't it beautiful the way the British Constitution establishes a framework that destroyed Boris Johnson's massive political power? The general election of 2019 gave him a huge majority in the House of Commons in the United Kingdom. And many constitutional thinkers in that country will tell you that that's a bad defect in the Constitution, because a Prime Minister with massive support in the House of Commons can do anything. I don't have time to go through the rules of the British Constitution that put the Prime Minister in that position. That's what they thought. That's what people say. That's what people have been saying for generations. And in fact, the British Constitution creates a framework in which Boris Johnson was destroyed as a political leader. And I'm going to comment on it during the lecture and the significance of it. Now, thinkers who have been over the past, well, were until July 2022, were outraged by Boris Johnson's antics. And they call it antics because I think of Boris Johnson as sort of not a destroyer of constitutions, but a sort of flippant, obnoxious vandal with a spray paint, making a joke of the House of Commons, making a joke of the Constitution. The forces that ended his premiership are very significant, and the people who were thinkers in law professors and academics and politicians outraged by Boris's antics. The thing that puzzles me about democracy is that they see the problem that Boris posed as representing a failure of democracy. It seems to me that Boris was the product of democracy. And Boris's terrific position of power, we got him as a political leader because of democracy. It was democracy that made him the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And it was democracy that destroyed him. Now, I think that democracy is a very complex phenomenon, and I'm really interested in the way in which people advocating what look to me like measures that take power away from the people and give them to particular persons, particular institutions, want to portray what they're advocating as democracy, when it looks to me like it's just the reverse. People have advocated measures that take away power from the people, as it seems to me, as protections against what Boris Johnson got up to. That's the phenomenon that interests me, but I'll have to move pretty fast to get to it. And I have, for the LLM students, I've given to Denis a list of these pieces of work that I'm going to discuss. Let me tell you very briefly about that. In fact, I should read the titles of them because it's fascinating. A New Britain, Renewing Our Democracy. It's a report by a commission that's set up by the Labour Party and led by Gordon Brown, a former Prime Minister. A New Britain, Renewing Our Democracy. That's the first. The second is actually not British, but very much part of British political and legal culture. Robert Spano, former President of the European Court of Human Rights. His lecture, The Democratic Virtues of Human Rights Law. A lecture defending the law and practice of the European Convention on Human Rights against political opposition in Britain. And there's that word democratic. He's defending it as democratic. The third is distinguished Professor Sir Geoffrey Jowell from University College London. Does the UK's unwritten constitution safeguard our democracy? And finally, a highly recommended report, you might call it, an academic, but highly academic, sophisticated report called What is Democratic Backsliding? and is the UK at risk? By Meg Russell and her colleagues at what they call the Constitution Unit, a very prominent institute at University College London. So I've given Denis the references if any of you want to read them, and they will give you, if you do, an insight into thinking about democracy in the United Kingdom today. Now, what I think about democracy is that it's ruled by the people, and aristocracy is ruled by the best people. And the title of my lecture is Aristocratic Elements in a Democratic Constitution. And I think a constitution ought to be balanced with features of democratic rule and features of aristocratic rule. And those valuable aristocratic features are not minor or incidental. I call them elements, aristocratic elements, to suggest that they're important and actually fundamental to good government. Now, I confess that I'm obviously trying to provoke you when I say that a constitution can only be good, which I will argue, if it has aristocratic elements. And I won't be surprised if you disagree with that. In this city, in this country, 5 successive French Republican constitutions since the 18th century have been set against aristocratic rule, in the sense of rule by a hereditary nobility. In the UK, well, the development of the Constitution of the United Kingdom since the 17th century has involved a massive diminution, downgrading, reduction of aristocratic power in the sense of the power of the hereditary nobility. It's not altogether gone. I'm embarrassed to tell you this if you didn't know this. I told you I love the British Constitution. I'm embarrassed to say that there are still 90 members of the House of Lords, which is one chamber in a bicameral legislature, who are there because they are hereditary holders of positions of nobility, perhaps because their great-great-grandfather won a battle for Queen Anne. This is shocking and disgraceful, and Tony Blair tried to make the House of Lords to abolish hereditary nobility, and even with his political power, the best he could do was to reduce the number, and now those 92 men, all of the men, incidentally, are elected by the members of the House of Lords from the ranks of what? Of the hereditary nobility. Now, the shocking thing about this is that it's not the most shocking thing about the House of Lords, which I will come to later. But that's bad, and I'm not advocating. It as a general principle of constitutionalism that the hereditary nobility ought to have a role in government. Far from it. I actually think that there can be circumstances in which, and I would say in the 13th century in the United Kingdom, there were circumstances, I think, in which it's right for the hereditary nobility to have a role in government. But it's not fundamental to good government, far from it. But hereditary nobility is not the only kind of aristocracy. Aristocratic rule by hereditary nobility is based on a presumption that they're the best people to rule. Defense of the House of Lords with its hereditary nobility in the United Kingdom has not always been on aristocratic grounds. Sometimes it's been on the ground that it's necessary for the protection of the rights of the landed nobility against the House of Commons. But when anyone defends the role of the House of Lords in the United Kingdom on genuinely aristocratic grounds, it's because of a presumption that the hereditary nobility are the best people to be ruling. That's aristocracy. And of course, there are other kinds of aristocracy. When I say that aristocratic elements are fundamental to good government, I mean elements of rule by the best people. Arrangements in which the persons exercising institutional power of the state are doing so, are in that position because they are the best people to be doing the job. I wouldn't particularly mind if you called it meritocracy, if you think aristocracy sounds too shocking. I use the older word as a reminder that what we're dealing with is not democracy. Now, of course, you might say that meritocracy is democratic if office is open to the people, and there's something to that. Well, at least if the people, in general, have access to education, entry to professions, appointments, promotions, and you may not want to call such arrangements aristocratic because they don't have to